Welcome to Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast series about communication skills in the workplace. I'm your host, John Witzman. Join me as I speak with industry professionals and Conestoga faculty and alumni to explore their journeys with reading and writing skills. Follow us as we talk about how communications learning has changed over the years, how these skills are used in a wide range of industries, and the future of workplace communications. So that's a wonderful way forward in our conversation. I think that idea of the difference perhaps between knowing the theory of communicating and then developing the skills required to communicate effectively. So is that something that you can sort of connect to looking backwards throughout your academic career, now into your working career? Do you see a progression over time in terms of your ability to communicate effectively? Is that grown over time?
Oh, absolutely. And we take on a lot of people that are just starting out their careers for the first time straight out of school.
Yeah.
And I think there's this perception that you need to be a naturally gifted writer.
Right.
And that is so not the case. It is definitely a skill that you develop the more you practice, the more you get out there and read, and talk to people. I mean, I always encourage our teammates, sit in on these media interviews with our clients and hear the language that they're using to describe and incorporate that into our materials, right? So it's definitely a skill that you develop over time. I think the more practice you get, the faster and easier it gets.
Right.
But I can tell you on pretty much any new hire that I've worked with, it's been on their performance plan to improve writing. It's like the number one skill that we need, and it's the number one skill that I think needs the most development straight out of school.
Let's talk about your work then, because I think you've brought us to a great place for us to sort of snap forward into the present. What goes into your work as a marketing communications specialist, and what is it about? How do people communicate in writing? Why is that so important? And where do early career professionals fall short in their writing?
Okay. Do you want? I'm assuming strictly with reading and writing is.
What we can branch out, but certainly let's start with reading and writing, and then we can look for any connections from that as a foundation into other forms of communicating.
Yeah, I mean, so in communications, you're responsible for really getting to know the product or the client or the service or whatever their focus is on, and you do that by doing a lot of reading. There's a lot of research that goes into that, online research, reading past history books, all of that stuff. And then the writing component comes with, we absorb, as humans, we absorb information through words, even if we like to claim that we don't read magazines anymore.
Right.
We still, there's still social media copy. There's still little tags on those YouTube channels. There's still subtitles. There's still writing that goes into speeches, right?
Right.
So words hit everything that we do in communications. And so I would say, I think when people are starting out in this field, they tend to kind of focus on what they know, right? So if they follow, I'm just making this up, but if they follow like a fashion blogger, they're going to write like that fashion blogger.
Right. Yeah.
And that might not be appropriate for a press release or for a speech for, a client that is focused on Indigenous tourism, let's say. Right. So I think you need to develop the different channels over time. You need to understand key messaging and how do you incorporate that into your writing. And you need to understand, as we mentioned before, like different tones and audiences.
That's such a fabulous example and such a really keen insight. I think the way you've expressed it is really brilliant. That idea that at that sort of initial stage of a person's career, they might have one sort of fully developed voice that would have been heavily influenced by their interests and whatever it is that they have exposed themselves to through their own that motivation, right? They've followed that motivation and through osmosis and through practice and through, talent and they've developed a strength in that voice. But now we need to be able to call upon that voice on a Monday and then a different voice on a Tuesday and so on.
And they also need to wear the hat of their target audience too, right? And I think that's not something that a lot of people understand straight out of school. Is they go, well, this is how I like it and this is how I understand it. And you go, well, that's great, but is that how our target audience is going to understand it, right? Like that's a different demographic, and how are you going to tweak it to fit to that demographic?
And that marks the end of another episode of Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast hosted by me, John Witzman, on behalf of the Communications Department and School of Interdisciplinary Studies at Conestoga College. You can find other episodes of this series on our YouTube channel, Reading and Writing Between the Lines. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks for listening.